everyone! So I decided to do a bit of a different video today, not usually something that Les and I do, and that is a book discussion. I read Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer as my first book of 2015, and this is a very well-known story, well enough to the point where I don't feel a book review is necessary. Instead, I wanted to talk about my feelings and what I thought about this book through a discussion. That being said, this will be a spoilery video, so if you are not already aware of what happens in the story, or you just want to remain ignorant of the facts, of all of the facts, before you read it, then I would just, go watch another one of our videos. That's cool. A quick overview for those of you who haven't read the book in a while. So Chris McCandless is a young man just graduated from university, and he has decided that he will, instead of joining society and becoming what I guess we call a productive member of society, he sells all of his possessions, burns his money, takes the car that he has and, just a couple things that he needs to survive, and sets out across the United States. He starts kind of from the East Coast area and then heads west and spends most of his time out there. He does spend some time in Nevada and South Dakota. He even ends up in Mexico at one point. But the final place that he goes is Alaska, and that is where the story becomes very familiar to a lot of people, because when he is in Alaska, he dies at the age of 24 in the Alaska wilderness by himself. The biggest question, the thing that gets brought up a lot and that really made me think when I was reading this book, is how do you picture Chris? You learn very soon off in this book that he dies, and you sort of slowly unfurl how this happened in a non-linear way. But it really comes down to, do you think that Chris was just a stupid, naive young person who did not understand what he was getting himself into, or do you think of him as more of an adventurous, almost romanticized in person who, decided to leave society behind and really become one with nature? People get very angry about the circumstances of Chris's death. Some people lean one way, some people lean the other, but I think there are a fair amount of people out there who probably are in the middle, and I feel like that's where I am. I would love to travel and hike around and sort of live off the land in a minimalistic style. That would be fun, at least for a while. And I admire the fact that he did this, but at the same time, he was still a young man. He's only 22 when he started doing this, and he obviously thought that he was better at things than he really was. He didn't have that sort of voice in the back of his head telling him, like, maybe you should rethink this. He was just like, nope, I am confident in my abilities, I'm not going to think about the consequences, and that, I think, is what makes him stupid, is that he went into Alaska without proper boots. The guy who brought him to the trail gave him his boots because he was like, this kid is not gonna make it. There's a certain extent that you have to be smart about what you do, and he did not do that. He was very ill prepared for the environment that he was going into. I mean, there are plenty of different points in this book where you could say, okay, well now he is, he's a more adventurous, romanticized, or here he's more stupid, ignorant. You could go back and forth, but that's sort of my main thing, is like, when he gets to Alaska, what happens there, and the fact that he does not even have the proper boots for April in, the last frontier. This sort of leads into another huge debate, and I feel that a lot of Alaskans who understand the environment they live in, even people in northern Canada too, see him and say he did not have respect for Mother Nature. He was ill-prepared, and he also killed himself, essentially, because he was too stupid to pay attention to what he was eating. However, I don't agree with that point. There was a recent article, being like 2013, Jon Krakauer published an article in the New Yorker about some new evidence that had come up from Chris's death. I'll link that down below. But it turns out that what Chris ate that they thought had potentially killed him was actually, he was being smart actually about what he ate. He was eating something that was okay to eat, at least according to the information that he had. Now that it's, 2013 in the article, they sort of explain, hey, look, like, these things can actually be poisonous in certain situations, and they lay it all out. It's kind of scientific, but you can get the gist of it, and I don't think Chris's death was his fault. Yes, he was ill-prepared, but he would have certainly lost weight living out there. But from what I read in the book and what we can understand from his diary and his journals, it seems like he was about ready to come home. He wasn't trying to go out there to commit suicide. So what he ate that eventually took his life, he did it on accident. And it's hard to fault someone for something like that when society at the time, based off of the information that he had, thought it was okay to eat those things. He wasn't accidentally eating the poisonous version of it. He was eating what they thought was the okay version. Turns out it's not. But it makes you sympathize with him a little bit more. So on that side of things, I will forgive Chris, or at least he leans more towards the good side for me when you take into account that how he died wasn't really his fault. However, his way of living, yes, it would be nice, but it is really hard to do in society today. And the thing is, he idolizes a lot of very flawed people. He brings a lot of books with him when he's traveling, and he, you know, writes in those books, underlines, copies things, says, yes, this is what I want to embrace. The thing is, he was celebrating people who were not perfect, great people. The one thing that really bothers me, and this is something that carries back from high school, is he does talk about Henry David Thoreau, and Thoreau wrote Walden, which is where he went to live in the woods and live off the land, and this was in the 1800s, so it was a little bit easier to kind of separate yourself from society and do that. The only thing was, Henry David Thoreau could walk to the store. He was walking to the store to get food when he needed it. He was not living off the land in the way that Chris wanted to. He might have had some good ideas, but I don't understand why he's idolizing him. And I feel like Chris had this idea, but he was taking things from people who he shouldn't have been listening to. Krakauer talks a little bit about it in the book too, how he is so attached to these people who really aren't perfect, great people. And Thoreau is just one of those examples. I just personally do not like Thoreau. Never been a fan of his. So the fact that he comes up in Into the Wild just kind of angers me a little bit. I find it interesting that before he went up to Alaska, he did spend some time hanging out with people who really seemed to like him. You think of Chris, maybe Chris was a very introverted individual, and I'm sure he was to a certain extent, but from the accounts that Krakauer has in here, from the people that he talked to who had met Chris, said that he was a really likable individual. And although he had, you know, these idealistic thoughts about how he wanted to live his life off of the land, away from society, and that's really hard to do these days, they said that he was an interesting person to talk to. They could tell he was well educated, and he obviously had a head on his shoulders. He wasn't a lunatic who just decided, you know, fuck everything, I'm gonna go run off to Alaska and try and, you know, be some sort of bushman. I did find this story extremely engrossing. I knew what it was about. I had seen the movie already a few years ago, so I was aware of the story, but I wanted the details, and I also really love Krakauer's writing, so I was excited to read this, and it was a fantastic novel. It was a 5 out of 5 stars for me. It was one of those things where you just close the last page, and you're just, it just washes over you, and you have to sit there and really think about everything because it's presented in such a thought-provoking, interesting, almost scary way at some points, because you know that it isn't going to end well. There is one other point that I think it is important to bring up when discussing this novel, and that is Krakauer's influence on the story. Crocker is a mountain climber, he is an outdoorsman, and he has the ability to relate to Chris really well because I think they share a lot of ideals, or at least ideas of how they would like to live their lives. Crocker says this right at the beginning of the book, that he has, you know, his opinions will be present at certain points. And there is an entire part where Crocker tells his own story, which I had already read in I Grew Dreams, so it was sort of a repeat for me. I knew the story, but he takes his story and says, here's how I think I can understand what Chris is going through. Here's how I can make you understand Chris better based off of what I have experienced when I was a young individual who thought I was invincible. He's taking his experience, and I'm sure it winds its way into the story in ways that we, the reader, cannot see. But I also think it was excellent that Crocker was the one who wrote this book, because he does understand where Chris is coming from. And he feels very passionate about Chris's story, and that passion and the amount of time that he spent researching comes through, and I think it makes for a really excellent story. It's told in such a gripping way, and you really feel for Chris when things go wrong, but also for Chris's family, who are talked about in this story, and you know, a little bit of light is shed upon them, but this is Chris's story first, they're second, so you only hear about them when the time is necessary. And Crocker got to know them, and he has spent so much time researching the story. I mean, he wrote this book years ago, and even in 2013 he's still publishing an article in the New Yorker about this. Like, Chris is the kind of story that sticks with you, which is why I really felt the need to at least sort of express how I feel and sort of bring up these things. Obviously, I really want you guys to let me know how you feel if you have read the story, even if you've seen the movie. The movie and the book are quite similar, so you're definitely getting the same idea for what's going on. There are some things that are missing from the movie that I think are very important that happen in the book, littler things, but you can still tell me what you thought. If you have other questions, other points that you want to talk about regarding this book, definitely leave those in the comments. This is the kind of book where when I finish it, I wanted to talk to people about it, but no one around me has read the story, so I was like, yes, I need to make this video. In conclusion, this is a fascinating story, and if you haven't read the book yet, but you decided to watch the video all the way through, read the book, because it sticks with you, and it makes you want to discuss and interpret, and that's when you know a book is a good book. Links are in the doobly-doo, and definitely leave any of your thoughts or questions in the comments below. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you later.